Joining me now, Colorado Senator and presidential hopeful Michael Bennet. All right, I hate asking other candidates about poll numbers. However, your candidacy does seem tied to Joe Biden's. You feel you defend. You have similar Medicare for all ideas, meaning you're not for what they're trying. You have a Medicare X. It's a similar. In some ways, I would argue you defended his proposal better than he did a couple of debates ago.
Well, I would say it's because it actually is my proposal.
Fair enough.
Although I'm happy to have him join me.
Okay. What do you make of his resiliency
I
in this
think
field?
that the number one issue for Democratic voters is finding somebody who can beat Donald Trump. And as long as Joe Biden has the well-earned name identification that he has, it's going to be hard to dislodge people unless something changes in the race.
Let's make it harder for you to break through. You're not on the far left lane over here. Yeah. You're trying to sort of straddle the sort of pragmatic center. I don't know what you want to call it. I'll let you describe it. Everybody has a different name for it. But it seems like Biden's casting a shadow over that effort.
I think that's fair to say that he's casting a shadow over that effort. I think what's not fair to say is that we're the same person. You know,
I get that.
We served at different times. We have different points of view. His view is, and he said this over and over, if we just get rid of Trump, we're going to go back to working together in a bipartisan way. Nobody wants to work in a bipartisan way more than I do, but we've had these huge structural issues from Citizens United to gerrymandering to the rise of the Freedom Caucus that has made Washington broken. It's broken Washington, and we have to fix that, I think, by building a constituency outside of Washington. That's a different point of view and a different vantage point.
I'm curious, have you seen a difference between what Iowans say to you and what your Colorado constituents say to you?
No, actually. I think that Iowa and Colorado were one state apart from each other, and what I see is incredible consistency. They want to beat Donald Trump. They want us to figure out how to cover everybody with health care. And if I had to summarize the last 10 years of my town halls, including Iowa and Colorado, it's people showing up and saying, Michael, we're working really hard, but we can't afford some combination of housing, health care, higher education, and early childhood education. We can't afford a middle-class life. That's what they're saying.
By the way, it is the common issue in every state in the union, just out in California. Everybody has the same issue. I'd throw transportation in there, which is part of the same.
It's all the same.
It's all wrapped up in the same issue.
And what I would add to it is the people that aren't coming to my town halls, whose kids are living in poverty, who are the families that I used to work for when I was superintendent of the Denver Public Schools, what they would say if they came is, we're killing ourselves. No matter what we do, we can't get our kids out of poverty.
When I'm not here in Washington, I realize how odd it looks at times that Washington is consumed by impeachment, and I think rightfully so. It's a very serious investigation that's happening. But I am mindful that the rest of the country is watching it in a fishbowl. They're not as consumed by it. How has this impacted your campaign? The campaign in general, not just yours.
I think it will impact the campaign. We're gonna have to figure out how to walk and chew gum at the same time. It's not going to be easy to do, and those of us that are in the Senate have a responsibility to make sure we carry it out well. You know, Chuck, your point on the perspective is interesting to me too. I was thinking about this all day today. It's how people in Iowa view Washington, people in Colorado view Washington. And also, on a day like today, what's the rest of the world thinking about Washington? When you have a bunch of elected officials storm into a secured room, what does the rest of the world think about?
They used to be on Jimmy Kimmel when they would make fun of other parliaments that get into fights.
That's right.
You know,
exactly.
It'd be like a joke.
That's
look at them. They can't run their democracy.
Exactly.
Jeez, and now we're the butt.
Or Trump caves to Erdogan and abandons the Kurds in the middle of northern Syria.
Let me ask you about that, though. How many people that you talk to in Iowa want out of these wars? And this is something where I think that there's an odd disconnect. On one hand, I think everybody's rightfully concerned about how this is done. But he's on to something bigger picture.
This is a very important point. Somebody leaned over to me today in our caucus lunch and said, nobody cares what happens in northern Syria. That's what they said. And
it's shameful that that's true.
But let me tell you something. That is why we need a better class of elected leaders in Washington, in the White House and in the Senate, because it matters to the national security interests of the United States what happens here. And the meta point that he has, which is we shouldn't have made so many stupid mistakes in the Middle East, that happens to be true. This case, though, is a case where over the course of 5 years, we put ISIS back in a box.
And we did it.
We lost
with a-
six
with a-
guys.
yeah, with a small
and,
footprint.
and the Kurds lost 10,000. And you're going to pick that as the one thing that you walk away from if you're president, with all the collateral damage?
Let me talk about, you're a student of history. Alexander Hamilton comes back alive today, and he sees our situation. Impeachment because of how he's conducting himself in office 11 months from an election. Knowing now what our system does, what do you think they would advise us
I think
to?
they would say that these guys were students of history as well, of a very particular kind of history, Roman history. And they set up this whole enterprise for fear of a guy like Donald Trump, who was a tyrant. That's what they were scared of.
So you think they would say, you better proceed through the process?
I think you better proceed.
Even if it's an election?
I think that's what they would say. Yeah.
Michael Bennet, your January, have you thought about the fact you may be listening to a trial rather than in Iowa?
We live in interesting times, Chuck.
Yes, we do. Senator Michael Bennet.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming in. Be safe on the trail.
Thank you.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.